Hello, it's me again, Dan Hudson, Executive Director of Nifty. Let's jump into this. I have Elle's questions that she prepared for our panelists, so we're going to dive right in. And while I pull up those questions, I'm going to go ahead and have our lovely panelists for this Where the Works session introduce themselves. And why don't we start with Isabella?
Yeah, for sure. Hi, I'm Isabella Price, and I am. Let's start with my pronouns. She, her. I am the film programs manager of the Langston here in Seattle. I'm also the program manager of the Seattle Black Film Festival as well.
Oh, and I should say one extra thing, just because it actually was written into Elle's questions here. Can you also share your first job in the film industry, Isabella, and then the rest of our panelists as we go along and introduce yourselves?
First job, as a lowly PA, as probably a lot of other people's experiences. I will say though, I was a PA when the Christopher Nolan Batman movie was filming in Pittsburgh, and so that's kind of exciting. But my only job was guarding fake snow. I had to make sure that people didn't eat it. That was my job. So.
That snow was very important for that movie. So good job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Zia, why don't we go to you next here?
Okay. Pronouns he, him, and I am a primarily writer, director, and cinematographer. And my first job on a film, I feel like I have a weirder, like, kind of never really worked on a set until much later. But I guess the first thing I did was I had a friend that filmed a lot of. We built a dolly with PVC pipe and steel in his garage, and so that was the first thing I did when I was 16. Is I helped him build that dolly to film some terrible, just long hours of mortgage brokers speak that I have no recollection of. So that was my first job.
I love that. I remember my first PVC dolly. I feel like that your first time with the PVC dolly is always a good time. Raven, I'm going to come to you next here.
Cool. My name is Raven Two Feathers. I am Cherokee, Seneca, Cayuga, and Comanche. My pronouns are he, they. Let's see what else was on the list. First job in the film industry. It could be split between two different things. I was a projectionist at Ballard High School. Shout out. Otherwise, my first project was one that I actually won an student Emmy for, so that was fun. Geoforce, A Journey to Understanding. So producer and co-director with Leo Pfeiffer. And now I'm a writer-director, just got my business going for a storytelling company because we do a whole bunch of different media. So yeah, that's my job, just bouncing around to different art forms.
Awesome. I love that crossfit, cross-disciplinary action there. Clyde, last but not least, welcome.
Yeah, for sure. I think my mic is the one that's rustling because I live in a tiny house and it's pouring rain. But my name's Clyde Peterson, and I'm an animator and director of feature films. My pronouns are they or he. And my first job was in 1995 at the Seattle, it was called the Film Company, I believe. And I used to physically label photographic slides for $5 an hour under the table in high school. So like now you have like stock photos you can just buy online, but in those days, these were the stock photos. So I would sit there for like 3 hours after school and put labels on film slides, like tulips, Skagit Valley, for like years of my life.
Nice. Those metadata skills are always important. You got to keep your assets organized. Love that. All right, now we're going to come to some of the big questions that people at any age or stage of their career, but especially those trying to get their foot in the door, trying to figure out where to start. What are some obstacles you have come across trying to find work, and how did you overcome it? And I'll do this kind of like bouncing around thing and call on folks. So Zia, I'm going to come to you on this one first.
Man, I think I'm still overcoming that obstacle, if I'm being honest about it. I think one thing that's really been one of the main touch points of my experience as a filmmaker is always returning to and recentering on the fact that I'm here for the art form more than anything. And so that always helps kind of continue to point me in the right direction. Because I think, anytime you're hired for work, it can, because my line of work when I'm getting paid on things is I function mostly as a freelancer, and then I funnel some of those wages into personal art projects and things like this. And so I've found that the obstacles are many in the sense that sometimes when I freelance, I feel that I'm thrown off the original trajectory and intention. And so that can have its own sort of fallout where then you take a few steps down a path that you actually distracts you from really developing your craft in the true way that you intend to. Freelance work, actually being hired. I think some of the obstacles there is that it is true that this is it is a competitive space, and more so as we hurtle into the future and technology becomes more ubiquitous and available and things like that. But I think for me, just in my personal experience, my main obstacle is I'm actually a relatively shy person. And I find that it's difficult sometimes to sort of stand boldly next to your own work and say, oh, I did this, and sort of claim that, and then take whatever conversations or offers and things come to you. So that is something that I continue to just grapple with in the relationship I have to craft, because it also comes from a place of sort of artistic purity as well, and not, you leverage certain things to make art, and then you don't want to. I have struggled sort of capitalizing in a certain way when I step into freelance, or I get solicited for paid work and things like that. So I'm always trying to. I think a lot of the obstacles I experience are more internal, but I feel like in the end, they are implicitly embodied in the art, and how it's eventually received by people. Hope that made sense somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's both heartening and like a bit of a question. Is like sometimes it doesn't get any easier. I don't know if that's resonating for some of our other panelists, but Raven, I saw you nodding a bit while Zia was talking, so I'm going to come to you next. You can maybe expound on or take your spin on that.
Totally. And I think there's a slightly different feeling that I have so I graduated college back in 2018. And so 2019, I was sort of on and off doing some work because I thought I was going to be moving back to New Mexico. And it was mainly getting my name out that I felt like was the big hurdle for me, because now it feels like there's 1,000 different things I could do. But really, I think from my background of being in production sound, learning when you need to put your foot down and say, these are the things that I'm going to go forward on, and finding the people who truly support you and reciprocating as much as you can in the work that you do to support them in their endeavors, and to lift everyone else up in the process. And so I feel like a lot of my struggles right now are finding what I truly want to focus on and what will essentially be the best path for me. So, and I really echo with what Bao was saying in the previous panel, And I think the hard thing is finding the people who you really want to work with and really gel with. So I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. That's great. Building the community and like all boats rising. I saw Isabella. It looked like that might have resonated a bit for you. So I'm coming to you next year on this.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the most difficult things, when you're trying to become a filmmaker, you're trying to work in film, is especially if you're a person of color, a woman of color, is trying to find other people that gel with you. You could probably tell by my background that I'm a big fan of horror, and trying to find other POC, other women, other queer people that are into horror movies, and not just a bunch of white dudes who are into it, has actually been really difficult. But over the years, I've been able to find groups of people. There's a huge community of people just like me who really like horror and who really like movies. And so for many years, I didn't think that I could find a community of other people. And once I actually left school, that was really when I started to find more of a community. And so I think the biggest obstacle was trying to get hired, because I wasn't in the right circles, because I wasn't in with the right people, because I wasn't in the right cliques, and I maybe didn't look the right way, or I wasn't the right kind of a person to be in the right kind of a scene. So then I made my own scene. I found my own people. I'm really grateful that I live in the age of the internet, so that I can reach out to people, no matter where they are. And that's really one of the things that I've done to overcome a lot of that sort of the obstacle of that is the internet, is finding people that I really like. You got a YouTube page that is really cool. I like your videos. I like, what you're talking about. You got a Twitter page. Your Instagram is fire. I reach out to people and talk to them, and I've been able to really amass a really great group of friends and networks because of that. So yeah.
I love that. Clyde, any of this resonating for you? And I also wondering, you mentioned your first job in Seattle was in 1995. So you could also maybe speak to a little bit kind of like different scenes or different communities and kind of ebbs and flows of what you've been plugged into.
Yeah, for sure. Everything everyone has said deeply resonates with me, in terms of like rising together with community. As a trans person, I'm definitely like very interested in working in queer communities and with Black and brown communities, and like with folks who are talking about marginalization and storytelling. And I feel like I spent a lot of my early years in film working for folks who it was like a really unbalanced feeling. And after like 10 years of working for folks, I realized like, oh, I can give all of my energy to these folks and like they'll just never reciprocate. And so the biggest thing for me was to just like break those relationships and just be like, see you later. And I am really grateful for the internet as well, and for finding like and building community globally. I think it's helped. I feel like it helped a lot during the pandemic because I was already a filmmaker with a global community and I was already connected to people online. And so I didn't feel like, oh, I can't go to the bar or whatever to see my friends. Like my friends live everywhere, and they're awake at weird hours, and so am I. And I can talk to people in London at the Fringe Queer Film Fest at 3 a.m. when I'm awake. So in terms of working, I like hate jobs. I hate jobs. I love working for myself. What Zio was saying, yes. I mean, what everyone has said, like, yes. I have really ridiculous, like, artistic intentions in filmmaking, and I find it grinds up with other people's ideals about capitalism. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I love that. I mean, our next question here kind of resonates a bit with the kind of community through line that I'm hearing from y'all. And actually, Zia, you touched on this a little bit, so I'm going to come back to you first on this. But what role does networking play when finding a job? And for folks just starting out, where would you recommend that folks try to start networking?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the word network, it's not really part of my lexicon personally, because I feel like it connotes it lacks authenticity to me. That's how I feel about it. So when I do feel more connected to words like community, where it feels like there's relationships, more of reciprocity happening, where you are both offering as well as receiving something, and it feels it's more in collaboration. Whereas my interpretation of networking and the way I've witnessed it in terms of its functionality in industry is, you're interesting, we'd like to eat some of that, and it's transactional. It doesn't resonate. It distracts me personally. However, for this conversation, I guess we'll use community and networking, I guess, interchangeably. What I found has been integral to my development as an artist, as a person, as a filmmaker, is I try as best I can to ground the process in community as much as possible, with people that I trust and can also receive feedback from, as well as, critique or whatever during the sort of crucible of process, because I think the outcome inevitably becomes better. But I also think with the beauty of the internet is what everyone's talking about, is the connection that we have all with each other, that available sort of lifeline. But at the same time, the world is not hurting for more content. So a big part of my work, as I feel as a filmmaker and as an artist, relies heavily on process, and outcomes hopefully will hold in the images or whatever we make some level of the intention and integrity that we hopefully embodied in process. And I think that's where you actually seed the important things, because that's really how you're spending your life, energy, and your time, is actually making something. So in that regard, I feel that networking, how it's functioned in my career, has been very organic. Just working immediately with the people that have been around me, and thankfully there's been wonderful people around me that have been very open to connecting me in community. A dear friend of mine, Rahwa Habte, through the Hidmo back in the day on 20th and Jackson, that was she was a major source of sort of seeing me as an artist and connecting me with people in community, as well as, back in the early aughts, the work that we were doing with Blue Scholars, and those folks were all connected in community as well. And so there was a natural kind of organic process of networking. And then as I've done more work, there definitely are the times where you get to field, solicitations and emails and this and that. So I think it's a dual process. But yes, sorry, took a while to say that, but that's it.
Yeah, no, I mean it can be a really loaded term, because networking can feel like the ickiest, grossest thing for some people when it is like super transactional in that way. No one wants to feel like a slab of meat. Clyde, I'm going to come to you next on this. You've mentioned that you were finding global community, which really helped you out during the pandemic, and you really don't like those JOBs. But what felt like natural and organic for you? Like what felt good in that sense?
Locally, the film forum has always been a place that I enjoy. And in terms of finding community, I always just find it at events that I attend. I think Seattle is a place where if you show up, then you're going to be a part of a group of people that keeps showing up. There's like a lot of people that stay home because it's raining, because the buses fucking suck, you know, a bunch of stuff like that. But if you're a person that like is willing to persevere and take that bus that comes every hour to get to the film forum or Langston to see a movie, like you're going to meet some people who are also willing to do that. And then you're going to be building your network from there. I'm a big fan of like building community across all of the arts. A lot of my community is based in music, in the music scene or the visual arts scene, the animation scene. So I really disagree with like the barriers that are placed from the art world between film and art. And my whole life, I feel like I've been fighting against those barriers to just have a community of like all kinds of artists who can come together and make something really creative. I work a lot in music videos. That's kind of my main bread and butter of JOBs. So, yeah.
Raven, I'm coming back to you on this. You're mentioning that you had your kind of new venture is like storytelling and like all sorts of different mediums and like what that could possibly be. So, and a lot of things are coming to you right now versus maybe you having to go the other direction. So, what does networking look like for you when on the other side of it, like people are reaching out to you?
Yeah. So many things to think about. And they all came to me at once. But we'll start with that. I started off in film and have started to get more into VR, video games. I recently wrote a comic that came out last year, just before the pandemic hit in February on Valentine's Day 2020. So that was a real close call on getting that release party set up and going. But I think with all of those different mediums and exploring them it's opened me up to so many more people and just genuinely asking questions and wanting to put in the effort to connect, sort of like what Clyde was touching on. It's like, you're going to have to put work into this, but you're going to get these incredible connections out of meeting people who you, again, genuinely do gel with. And whether or not you make work with them is another thing. If you want to, cool. If not, that's also fine. Because there is all the other sort of interactions that you have with people outside of just the transactions that we at times have to make because of the society that we live in. But there's so much more in-kind and friend-based interactions that you have with people. Let me look back at the question again. Yeah, I think just asking questions and genuinely reaching out to folks who you are interested or you like their work. And if that sort of click with them happens, it happens. And just being very intentional about who you approach and if you need to step back, not feeling bad for doing that. So yeah.
I love that. You don't have to say yes to everything, and just because you've met somebody doesn't mean you have to work on every project they come to you with. Isabella, I'm going to come to you on this one, and I'm wondering, there's a couple questions coming in. People are really resonating with your talking about POC and horror, so maybe you can share a little bit about getting into that community a bit, and then also would love to know, like, kind of touching, because you represent a film program on behalf of Langston, correct? So networking can really kind of look different, like when you're representing an organization that has programs.
Yeah. It's true. I'm also deeply apologetic. My cat is going ham behind the scenes. So if you hear the crashing of something, and I'm trying to wrangle her at the same time. So yeah, I resonate a lot with what Elle and Clyde were talking about. Like, showing up is really important. For me, I have this idea. The Langston didn't have an ongoing film program. And so I was like, hey, can I come like once a month and just screen my favorite like Black horror movies? And they were like, yeah, sure. And I was like, I don't want any money. I just want to do it because I love movies so much. And I just want a space for my other community so that we can watch horror movies together. And I did that for a year. And then they were like, would you like to continue doing that? Actually, would you like a job? And then they hired me after that, which was great, you know. And I think what Clyde was talking about, it's so important to show up in Seattle. I know that like we have a tendency to be so shy, you know, we're twee folk, you know, but like this industry, you can't be shy. You have an idea, you have to pursue that idea with everything that you've got, you know. You want to talk to somebody, you got to talk to them, you know. Just staring at them from the corner of the room being like, maybe, I don't know, they don't want to talk to me. They might be thinking the same thing that you're thinking, you know. So many times I've talked to people and I've been like, I've got this idea for this thing, and they've been like, oh my God, I've been thinking about this idea for years. And it's like, oh, well, let's do it. Let's just get together and do it. I think that for a lot of people, you know, one of the pros and the cons about networking is, one, you have to get out there. You have to break out of your shell, and you have to put yourself out there, which is the scariest thing. You have to put your ideas out there. Some of your ideas, which are not going to be that good, some of them are going to be kind of half baked, but you still got to put yourself out there, which is so scary. And then also some of the times, you know, you're going to have to work with people maybe that you wouldn't expect that would be into the same things that you're into. People that don't look the same as you, people that don't come from the same community that you come from. But those are probably going to be the people that you gel with the most. And you want many different kinds of people because you want different kinds of views and different kinds of ideas and things like that, because that makes a better piece. So it is really scary because you're going to have to put yourself out there, but once you do, you're going to find your people. The more, because you're going to say something that somebody else has been thinking about for years and years and years, and they've been too scared to say it. And so you gotta be the first one a lot of the time to reach out, which is, it's hard. It never gets any easier. I won't lie to you. It never gets easier. But you gotta do it. And a lot of the times it works out really well. And for horror communities, I found horror communities on Twitter, honestly. There's horror noir. There's a bunch of Black horror podcasts. So then I would listen to the Black horror podcast. There's a great documentary called Horror Noir that came out on Shudder. I followed everybody that was involved in that documentary. I just like consensually, softly, passively cyberstalked everybody. If you made a horror film and you were Black, followed you on Twitter, slide into those DMs. Hey, I saw your film. Filmmakers love positive. They love people being nice to them. And I went in. They love flattery, like everybody else. I went into everybody's DMs and I was just like, hey man, I really like what you're doing. I saw your horror short film in that festival a couple of weeks ago. It was so dope. Like, let's talk about werewolves. And then like, we just like hit it off like that. And you know, people just want to talk about what they love. And so that was really how I built a lot of my communities, was just sliding into people's DMs, telling them congratulations for the work. I listened to you on a podcast. I love what you said about Blade. It's also one of my favorite movies. Like, let's talk about Black vampires. And that was really it for me. So yeah, it's just that simple. People open up when they talk about film. It's really incredible. Film is such an incredible medium. It goes across languages, borders, countries. You know, people just really open up about it. So that's why I stay in this wild industry.
I love that. Thanks for that. And I also, one of the things one of my takeaways from what you had to share there is you created your own opportunity, which turned into a job. And people should not be afraid. If you love a filmmaker, if you love an organization, if you're like, hey, I've got an idea, I want to do this thing,
Yeah.
like who knows what can happen? Like that's
Yeah.
awesome.
And most of
And
the time, organizations, they're waiting for you. They want a person to reach out to them and say, I've got an idea, I really want to do this thing. So that, because most organizations are so strapped for time, resources, energy, people, you know, and like if you come in with the enthusiasm and the ideas, then we'll find the resources for you so that you can go and do what you want to do. So yeah, you just got to put yourself out there. Yeah.
I love that. And I'm super excited to say that Elle Venata, our our planned moderator, is here, and I can officially hand the mic off. Thanks for being here, Elle. Thanks for sticking with it and figuring out the tech stuff.
Yeah,
And
thank you so much for
I'll let
taking
you
over.
I'll let you take it from here. We got through a couple of your questions, and you can pick it up.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's go to really whoever wants to talk. How did you choose your career path? Like, what was that journey like? Did you always have a career path, or did it kind of just take you where you ended up going?
I could talk on that for a sec. I just followed my interests, and I've tried to do that like my whole life. I went to college for documentary filmmaking, but I went to Fairhaven, which is a really experimental college. So I did a lot of independent study. And then when I got out of college, I went on tour with rock bands for like 10 years, just for fun, for a job. And then I thought, oh, I'd like to get back into filmmaking. And I started working with my friend Britta Johnson, who's an amazing animator in Seattle. And I was like, oh, I love animation so much. And so I just became a self-taught animator and started making music videos for friends for really cheap or for free to practice. And then I started making music videos on a pretty like rapid basis for a record label called Kill Rock Stars. And then I was like, hey, I've been making music videos for you all the time. Like, you should just hire me as a full-time music video maker. And they were like, well, think about this. And then I happened to be in Portland, and I saw one of the guys from the label, and he goes, oh, you should come by the office. We want to do that thing. And I was like, which again, I think is all about showing up. And so I worked for them for a few years and just made like 30 videos in 2 years. It was like grad school for me, getting paid. I only got paid $500 a month, but at the time it was enough to pay the rent, which is all I really needed. You know, I was like, I have a bedroom in a house in Seattle, and I just need to pay the rent somehow. I did a lot of other weird jobs. Like I worked at a place called World Famous as an assistant editor and copy edited like Bainbridge jeweler ads, like 90 versions of them with ad like listings for each mall address and shit like that, but it wasn't for me. But yeah, that's kind of my career path, and then I got really excited about making feature films, and I've kickstarted 2 feature films. I'm in the middle of making a 3rd one right now. So yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. I love that you kind of just like built your own path like the whole way. Nothing was handed to you, which I respect. Clyde or somebody else, can you talk about how you learned the necessary skills for your field?
I could talk a little bit about this. For me, so I went to school initially for a lot of things. I went to school for childhood education and psychology because my parents wanted me to get a real job. And my idea of I didn't even know really what a filmmaker was, and I didn't really understand like what I could do in film. I just knew that I loved movies, but I didn't know what that meant. I couldn't fill in because when I was growing up, there were no filmmakers that looked like me. Every filmmaker looked like Quentin Tarantino or Steven Sonberger. Like every filmmaker looked like a white dude, you know, in a baseball cap. Like that was the look. So I didn't really understand like what I could do with it. So I went to school like a good daughter, and was super miserable. And then I got a scholarship for film school and went to film school against my parents' wishes. They were cool with it after a while, also because they didn't have to pay for it. So once I graduated from school, you know, I was just kind of trying to get a bunch of jobs around as whatever I could, peeing for people's sets, doing film screenings for like my friends, curating stuff, whatever I kind of could do. And a lot of my training for being the film programs manager was kind of on the job, and just listening to what other people needed. A lot of film, you really don't need an education, a formal education for film. It's one of the greatest kind of art forms to where you really don't need to have some like a master's or a BA. That should never stop you from being able to pursue film. If you've got ideas, you've got dreams, you've got, you know, the know-how, you've got the ambition, you can go for it no matter what. You can pull people together. You got an iPhone, boom, you're set, you know. And so a lot of it was just doing it. It was trying it. I'm still kind of in the process of learning as I go, learning as I try things, learning how to program an entire year of film programming. Was a lot of emailing people, and the start of the email was, "Hi, I'm new at this. I don't exactly know what I'm doing, but I would really appreciate if you could help me out." Like just being really open with people, because like there's no schooling for film programming. Like that's not there was nothing I could take online. I Googled it. I Googled, how do you program films? How does film programming work? How do you work in a film program? Like there's not a lot of information out there. So it was like talking to my other friends who'd programmed for other companies, talking to my friends who had programmed for the Northwest Film Forum, talking to my friends who programmed for SIF, volunteering. I volunteered a lot for SIF. I volunteered a lot for the Langston. I had volunteered for the Langston for years before I had even tried to work for them or do anything for them. And I kind of learned by observing, and by asking people questions, and by telling people like, I just want to know how this works. I just want to watch you. I'll be quiet, please. I promise. Like it was just a lot of that. It was just a lot of like, hey, can I ask you for coffee? I just have some questions about like what you do and like how this works, and like, because I'm interested in it. I don't know what it is, but I'm kind of interested in it. So it was a lot of that. It was a lot of there was really no formal education for a lot of this stuff. School only got me so far. School got me to understand what 3-point lighting is. And then they were like, all right, now you're on your own. And that was kind of it. So I know how to format a screenplay. I know what 3-point lighting is. But everything else was like talking to people, learning, volunteering, trying, emailing people. Yeah, it was a lot of that. Yeah.
And I think I'll jump in as well. On Isabella's point, there's a lot that, I mean, I went to school for film as well, but I felt like that point was, of course, learning the basics of what you would be expected to do on either indie or Hollywood sets. And while it is helpful, it's not the end all be all. There are different ways that you'll see folks who have formally been trained in film and those who haven't been formally trained in film. There are points where we'll talk a little bit differently, but for the most part, you know, it's about what the end product is going to look like and if you can work with that person. And so I feel like a lot of the stuff that I've been doing, and I think in general, storytelling has sort of just been what I always came back to. I had taken an engineering course when I was in high school that went towards college credits, but you know, it was about that human connection and being able to tell stories with people that really pulled me back into film. I mean, there's a great amount of human connection when it comes to engineering as well. But it was just about being able to create these things and to tell stories that we want to tell, and essentially bring them to life. And so I feel like a lot of the filmmaking that I do, even though I have things in my back pocket that helped me from film school, and that it really, having that 4 years to honestly relax and mess up without necessarily having to do as much work at that point because I was a student. And I had the luxury of my mom helping me for as far as college is concerned. It gave me room to grow into who I am and to really find solid footing on what I want to do, what sort of stories I want to tell. And after getting out of college, I got pulled into a lot of different art scenes as well. Thus why, I've done comics. I'm starting to get more into tailoring clothes, which has been a trip, just to sort of redefine or look at the mirror of what we think masculinity is. So I'm going for a 1920s style and essentially, doing as much research and hands-on practice of doing these things. And through that, I have definitely learned about my mistakes and learning the long, slow process that it takes to create things. But it's been such a joy to just do it. And I didn't always give myself that sort of freedom when I was making films because it had to be perfect. But now I'm like, nope, we're gonna leave the raw edges, if you will, and just go for it. Because it's been so much more. It's just been so much more than just sitting there and theorizing. So.
That's awesome. Thank you. I love that you're working on 1920s clothes. I think that's so cool. I love old fashioned.
Because it's like the masculine style was sloped shoulders and an hourglass curve.
Right. Okay, this is really for anybody. What would your advice be to a young BIPOC person who is trying to make their way in film?
Zia, do you want to take this one?
I can try. I think we talked about this a lot already with like community. I guess this is one of these things where it's like, I'll share some of my personal story because I don't know that I have like the greatest advice or nuggets. But so my favorite movies growing up were Pete's Dragon, The Dark Crystal, The Wiz, and Mel Gibson's Hamlet. So, and I was like 6, 7 years old. And I would watch these movies obsessively. And then when I was like 7, my dad took me to the Seven Gables Theater, RIP, on Roosevelt. And there was an Iranian movie playing, actually. It was called The White Balloon, Bag Konak Sefi. And it was directed by Jafar Panahi. And I remember being 7 years old and watching this film. And it was like, it's in Farsi, and it's like, you're here, I'm like, oh, this sounds like home. Wait, these look like my cousins. And it was like well produced enough that the film brings you in, but it's also not like these other films that were my favorite films. And it was the first time that my 7-year-old brain was like, wait a minute, it feels like there's other people here that I'm not seeing in the pictures, and they're doing something. Like there's other people like actually doing this thing. And then I started realizing there must be other people doing that on all those other things that I like. Oh my God. So like that was like huge. So in that context, like representation absolutely matters in like profound ways that I think are very nuanced and very deep. And to me, that that's very different too than there's like a normative, what this is what I call it, a normative game of representation happening, where you'll still have like very narrowly defined conflicts that still have a certain perspective, whether that's from sort of a white normative gaze or a capitalist, and then like you'll plug different looking people, be like, look, it's representation. This is like, I think we need a conversation about this. So anyway, I think like that was like dumb luck, me seeing that film at 7, and then because that really, I was like, I want to do this. I want to do whatever the people are doing that I'm not seeing or doing in these pictures. And that was like huge. And I think that really set this like one track focus from 7 years old that like is this weird unbroken lineage. So I think all that to say that it was weird. That film felt like I did find a piece of community. So just going back to that idea, I think that set the stage for my young mind to be very open to collaboration in that way. I think we're all these little Venn diagrams, and you find where you cross over and things like that. And so I feel that, yeah, I don't know how that translates to advice per se, but it's sort of like there are things out there. There are clues for you that aren't. They might not be the most immediately obvious or available things, but they are there. The collaborations are there. The people are there. The art is there that will resonate and that might guide you along the way. And there's also, I think, in the moment that we're living in now, more people than ever that are ready to collaborate and tell different stories. Truly. So and then also as you know, to echo really what everyone else is saying, is and acclimatize to actually experiencing, like embodied experience. Your nervous system has to go through the act of creation, right? So doing that as much as possible, whether it's not in perfect alignment with your artistic ideals, that's fine. But other people that kind of feel like I do on this set, interesting. Now we'll talk on some other thing. So anyway, that's that.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that, you know, like I said before, there's people out there, there's communities out there, and I think more than ever, I'm seeing more and more BIPOC filmmakers, creators out there than ever. I think that the internet has really kind of leveled the playing field. Before, you know, in the olden days, you kind of had to go through the studio system, and it was the producers who would greenlight whether or not a film could be seen or not. Now, the barrier for entry is like, do you have a YouTube account? Do you have a Vimeo account? You can put your stuff on. You have a TikTok? Some of these TikToks I'm out here seeing should win Oscars. Some of these TikToks, you know, and it's just it's really wild. The barrier for entry is so low, and I would just say, like, for BIPOC, it's so hard to do this, to put yourself out there, because of the fact that so many of your ideas will be brand new to people. They'll be brand new in a way that, like, a lot of people are not ready for, and they're going to hear your ideas and they're going to be like, well, I don't know if there's an audience for that. Those people who say that there is no audience for whatever kind of film that you want to do, they're so wrong. I mean, like, who knew there was an audience for Wes Anderson movies? You want to see movies about like skinny white people in 60s clothing talk about their family issues? Like, who knew there was going to be a whole genre, you know, of movies for that? But those films are super successful. Wes Anderson films are super successful. So your film is also going to be able to find the audience, because we live in a global market. So there's going to be people that you can reach now, no matter where they are, that you'll be able to touch with your film. And so, you know, it's going to be a lot of no's. It's going to be a lot of people who are going to say they don't get it. I don't understand this pitch that you got your screenplay. I don't get these characters. I don't resonate with your character. That's something that I hear a lot. You know, a lot of my screenplays and things like that have like Black female characters, and it's always like, well, I don't really resonate with this character, you know, and you're going to hear that a lot, but that shouldn't stop you. And you've got to keep making things that are authentic to you. It's going to be hard because you're also going to be pressured to make things that are kind of like mass marketed, that's for everybody, maybe water down some of your stuff, but you've got to make things that are authentic. The as my grandmother used to say, the riches are in the niches. You know, the more that you make it authentic to your experiences, the more that it kind of spreads out to other people as well. So don't be afraid to be authentic. Don't be afraid to speak your truth. Don't be afraid to stick to your guns about what you want to do and the kind of characters that you want to portray. Who knew that Get Out was going to be such a huge movie? That movie had never kind of been done before. And that movie changed the horror genre for the better. So, you know, you just really have to do what is true to yourself, no matter what anybody says, because it's a lie. People are starving for diverse content. We need it more than ever. And people want it so bad. And I think the top 10 grossing movies of the past decade have all starred people of color and women because we want it so badly. We're so tired. No offense to Wes Anderson. I love your films, okay? But also, you know, people love they're looking for diversity. So don't be afraid to be authentic and put yourself out there. So